Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first of 4 webinars for the BCRC's 2025 webinar series. Today, we're going to focus on what cow-calf producers need to know when it comes to the use of growth implants on cow-calf operations. I'm Kristen Thompson, Knowledge Mobilization Specialist with the Beef Cattle Research Council, and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. We are very happy to be able to put these webinars on through the BCRC's knowledge mobilization work funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and Canada's Beef Science Cluster. Before we get started, I'm going to go through a couple of housekeeping rules. So you will be able to see and hear myself as well as our speakers, but we cannot see or hear you. If you do have questions, we ask that you submit them through the Q&A tab, which is on the bottom panel of your screen. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar where we will address these questions live. The webinar is also being recorded, and we will be sending out the recording to everyone that registered for this webinar within the next 3 to 5 business days. You can find recordings of all of our past webinars, as well as other great videos on our website, beefresearch.ca, or on our YouTube channel. So this webinar is also available for CE credits for veterinarians and registered veterinary technologists across Canada. So if you identified yourself as a vet or RVT when you registered for this webinar, you should be receiving a certificate through email in the next few days. Remember that you must attend the entire webinar in order to be eligible for the CE credit. Credits are also available for past webinars, which are listed on our website. Credits can be obtained by watching the webinar recording and receiving a score of 80% or higher on the associated quiz. For more information on CE credits, you can visit beefresearch.ca/CE credit. This page provides some details on how to receive credit for both live and recorded events, as well as some frequently asked questions. If you do have further questions or have not received your certificate after the live webinar or completion of the quiz, you can contact Dana Parker, the BCRC's Veterinary Collaboration Specialist, and her contact information is up on the screen now. On beefresearch.ca, we do have a dedicated webpage focused on growth implant use on cow-calf operations. This page includes valuable information on the types of growth implants available, implant procedures, and how to get started with using implants. To remain updated on these and other new resources, you can subscribe to one of our mailing lists. Now, without further ado, we have 2 very exciting speakers lined up for you this evening who are ready to share their thoughts and to answer your questions. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lauren Younker, and invite her to share her screen. Lauren, if you're able to share your screen, I will introduce you. Lauren is a PhD feedlot production consultant with TELUS Agriculture and Consumer Goods. She works with feedlots across Canada and internationally to enhance cattle performance through data-driven management strategies. Lauren specializes in optimizing implant programs through the use of individual animal data, benchmarking, and on-site implant audits in order to align implant use with performance goals and carcass outcomes. With that, I will turn it over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Kristen. I think that should go. So tonight, I'll focus on covering what implants are, how they work, and how to implant properly, so I can arm you with the tools as a cow-calf producer to determine how implants can fit into your operation. So in order for me to kind of understand where the industry sits now, I went back and took a look at the 2023 cow-calf survey to determine what the biggest barriers were to using implants in your herd as a cow-calf producer. And so when we look across what the Canadian landscape answered, I feel like Betty and I can help provide you confidence to combat a lot of the barriers we're seeing relative to the economics, labor, logistics, and just giving you the confidence to know the technique and what implants will work best for your operation. So while Betty will review a lot of the economics for her ranch and how implants play a role in that, I'll try to provide you with the tools you need to feel confident in implementing an implant program for your herd that works within your logistical constraints. And so we can't talk about implanting cattle without first understanding what implants are and how they work and what they do to improve growth across your herd. And so essentially what they are small hormone containing pellets that are placed just under the ear of the under the skin in the ear of the animal. And so this is designed partly because there's a lot of blood flow there, and that hormone will pay out as the blood flows around it, but also the ear does not enter the food chain. And so that is not something that will end up on the plate of a consumer, which can be a common concern, especially for those of you that might be dealing with a more customer-facing role. These hormone compounds that mimic naturally occurring compounds in the cattle already pay out anywhere from 90 to 200 days, with a couple of situations where we might be a little bit shorter or longer. That payout period that we talk about is the period where the minimum concentration of that hormone is required to cause a productive response. And so we'll see a spike in hormone when we implant the cattle, and then that slowly pays out over time to a point where it essentially runs out, and we either have to re-implant the cattle or we've marketed them to the next phase of production. That payout can be dependent on the age of the animal, the rate of gain, the hormones that are present in the implant, and their current plane of nutrition. And so cattle that we have a better plane of nutrition or have a little more groceries going into them will have a better response to that implant. And so what it's doing is essentially helping your calves use the nutrients that they're consuming out on pasture to turn into more lean growth and more pounds for you as a producer at weaning time or whenever you're planning on selling your calves. And so at the end of the day, implants will not replace good management. We still want you to manage your cattle properly, and healthy and less stressed calves are going to respond the most to an implant. So how do implants work? There are three primary types of compounds used in implants, and I'll just go from least potent to most potent. And so progestin is a hormone, that synthetic progesterone that would be what we consider the least potent implant or hormone that is used in implants and provides less pronounced effects. Estrogens, those would typically mimic estrogen, as you can imagine, and they will help to improve gains on pasture as long as your pasture quality is adequate. And they would be what we consider your medium potency implants. Androgens, these would be your highest potency implants. They mimic testosterone and what we would see in the steers and bulls. These would be more effective and most effective when we pair them with a high energy ration, so some more of your higher end backgrounding rations potentially, and then a lot in the feedlot system with our finishing rations. And so in the cow-calf sector, most people are going to implant once at branding, and those implants are going to be typically your progestin or estrogen type implants. Re-implanting would be typically reserved for those of you that retain ownership and plan to keep those calves past weaning. And so that's when we would discuss using the stalker and grasser implants. So what does this mean for you as a producer? So we always talk about implants in the feedlot world and in cow-calf too, being the silver bullet and one of the highest ROIs that we can have. And so it's because it increases our average daily gain anywhere from 10 to 30% and improves feed efficiency from 5 to 15%. As a cow-calf producer, you're not going to be typically measuring how much your calves are eating because they're eating grass out on pasture, but you will be able to see that meaningful difference at weaning when you get anywhere from 10 to 20 extra pounds a calf. And so if that's something that you're tracking year over year, implementing those implants, you will be able to see and track those gains relatively quickly as you manage your implant programs. So how do we manage implant success and make sure that implant is working to the the best of its own ability. The the best thing, healthy calves with adequate nutrition and minimize stress, we're going to see that closer to that 20 pounds, 25 pounds of extra weaning weight when we manage those three. The fourth point I have here is optimal timing. Optimal timing includes reimplanting cattle and managing with your endpoint in mind, and when is my marketing date and how can I line up implants to line up with that. This one is more difficult to manage as a producer who's got calves on pasture, who might not be able to pull those calves in to reimplant. And so when I think about optimal timing for a cow-calf producer, it's that branding season when you're processing calves and giving those implants, and making sure we get them at the beginning of the essentially pasture turnout season. The graph I have here just explains how those implants pay out. And so I talked about there being an increase, a sharp increase in hormone when we first implant those calves. And that will happen, that maximum hormone release will be anywhere from typically 7 to 10 days post implant. And then it slowly pays out over time. And as that minimum concentration for productive response decreases, we'll add in a reimplant if we're in a feedlot setting or in a system where we can address some of those logistical constraints. So one of the barriers to using implants was not knowing what implants to use and not knowing the technique. And so the implants that we would recommend or that are legal to be used in Canada would be these top 5 that I have listed here. So your Ralgro, Synovex C, Component EC, Compudos, and Encore are all approved for use in suckling calves, and at around typically 45 to 60 days of age. And so Ralgro would probably be the most typical one that we see across the industry that is used in our suckling calves and is available for both steers and heifers. When we look at the backgrounders or the grass or stalker implants, so if you're retaining ownership, what's the next step? You can continue to use some of these suckling calf ones, so the Ralgro, Compudos, and Encore. But what we would typically see in the backgrounding phase is anything with the G, so grass or grower implants. So your Revlor G, Component TEG, Synovex Primer, and Synovex 1G. Synovex 1G has a longer payout than the other 3. So if there's an opportunity or a situation where you want to keep your calves longer but can't bring them back in, Synovex 1G could solve some of those concerns. And then the other 3 are typically if you're in a phase where you're preconditioning or have a shorter time frame. Proper implant procedure. I think this is one of the situations that does not get enough airtime when we talk about implants, is the actual procedure and treating implanting cattle like the importance that it is. And so the first thing I always go over with producers and with implant and processing teams is to make sure we have the right tools in place. And so check your needle and your gun. And this is really cheap insurance. I would always suggest anytime there's a slightly bent needle, anytime there's a bird or dull needle, toss it in your sharp spin and get a new needle. Always have extra needles on backup. So if you hit the gun against something in between calves, you can replace that needle quickly and easily. A sharp needle will make the job a lot easier and will help you make sure that implant is implanted correctly. Disinfectant. I think this one is again another really cheap insurance that doesn't get enough airtime. So disinfecting that needle in between every single animal is huge. If we don't disinfect and we have dirty ears and we end up getting a lot of bacteria in that ear, an abscess can form around that implant and that implant won't pay out. And so we've essentially wasted that on that calf. And so I really try to stress with my crews to use a disinfectant solution and to just always be redipping if you skip or if you hit the needle against something. Um, and so in order to use a disinfectant solution, you would pick this up about the same time when you pick up your implants from your veterinarian. But I would use any of the disinfectant solutions that are available. So chlorhexidine, stanhexidine. We suggest to use about 200 mils of disinfectant per gallon of water. And then within those trays that you see here, fill those about a quarter full. And in this case, I have 2 sponges, but there's also implant trays that have rollers. Always make sure that that needle, when it's not implanting a calf, it is in contact with that disinfectant solution. And that just makes sure that that stays clean and that we're not introducing unnecessary bacteria to those ears. I've done a lot of implant checks, and I would say almost all of the implant recs that I've seen over the last few years have always started with dirty ears and with wrong disinfectant use. And so that brings us to the animals themselves. What do we need to do to make sure these cattle are being implanted properly? Properly restraining your animals makes a world of difference. The tighter their head is and stopped from moving, the easier it is for you to grab that ear, get the right angle, and get that needle in the right spot to make sure that implant pays out. And so that would include, your chute, your calf table, in the branding pen if you're doing a rope and drag, to make sure those cattle get the correct just make your life easier when you're trying to implant those animals. Going back to disinfecting, always ensure the ear is clean prior to implanting. So not only do you need to make sure that your needle is clean, make sure the ear is clean. And so have a brush there. And if you noticed on the previous slide, there was a bucket beside the implant tray, and that had a brush in there so they could scrape off any visible manure or any wet ears that were dirty and needed to be scrubbed prior to implanting. That solution, both in the implant tray and your bucket on the side, can be recharged based on how dirty the ears are. So if it's a dry day and the calf's ears are all dry, you're probably not going to change it out much. But if it's a wet day and things are muddy, you're going to be scrubbing more ears, and you'll probably be changing that out every 50 to 100 animals. So I can't stress this enough, is that dirty ears will increase your risk of infection and lose any ability you had to gain from that implant. Proper implant procedure. As cow-calf producers, you guys have the opportunity to have ears that don't have implant or tags in them. And so we stress the middle third of the ear would be our preferred zone to implant. And so that's at least an inch away from the edge, from from any scars, old implants, tags, etc. We want to have a lot of blood flow and no scar tissue around where that implant is. And so as a cow-calf producer, you typically determine where those first tags are going to go. And so always think about tag placement when you're tagging your calves, and try and avoid the middle third so that implant can be laid in there. If there is a lot of other tags or scar tissue in that middle third, our secondary option is the top third on the other side of the ridge. And we recommend that to a lot of feedlot producers if they have calves coming in with a number of tags or old holes. So implanting, this is, we're finally getting to actually implanting the calves. This will take practice, and it's a very learnable skill, but it's going to take you a few calves to get comfortable. So best practice here would be always try to make your calf as restrained and still as possible. That ear is clean and dry. Shoot for getting in the middle third of the ear between the skin and the cartilage. This here is going to take some practice, and insert that needle shallow under the skin. It'll take you some feel to kind of determine the best angle to put that implant in under the skin, and then deliver those pellets in a straight line and pull out smoothly. And hopefully you should feel the top of the ear. You can feel those pellets in a straight line under the ear. If you are feeling the top of the ear, do not put your thumb over the hole or the injection site, because your thumb has bacteria on it and you're just introducing bacteria into an otherwise clean site. And so we recommend just kind of feeling on top of the hair where the implant should be, and you should be able to feel that. And so if you did it right, you should feel a straight row of pellets under the skin, and that ear isn't torn. And so working on suckling calves is a great place to start, because there's fewer pellets in those implants and kind of gives you an opportunity to really feel and understand how to get into your ears. So troubleshooting. So what happens if you have issues? My recommendation is, if your pellets don't all go in, or if you go through the ear, I always say just remove what pellets are in there and redo it. Implants are relatively cheap to the value that they provide. And so a couple of implants pushed out and redone is going to provide you more value than leaving them and not doing them at all. Anytime that you pull out of the ear, disinfect that needle again. Like I said, cleanliness is key here to making sure that we get the most value out of the implants. If your pellets end up bunched or crushed, or they end up in the cartilage, check your needles. And if there's a burr on it, or if it's bent or slightly dull, change it and change your placement angle. We do a lot of implant audits approximately 3 to 4 weeks post-implant. And I know at that time your calves are likely out on pasture, but if you're riding through the herd and you see a bunch of calves with swollen ears, that's a good feedback that ear cleanliness was not correct, and to review your technique. And so on the right-hand side here, just have a couple of examples of what those abscesses look like. They're quite large, and you should see them from a ways away. Implanting heifers. I think this is probably one of the questions we get the most, and probably has the most discussion around it, is what do you do with heifers in a cow-calf setting? And so there's been a fair number of research in suckling calves looking at what those implants do on future reproductive performance. And for those of you that are retaining heifers, I think there's good news here that they can be used in the suckling phase, and we recommend it. And a lot of the research says prior to 4 months of age, using implants in heifers has no effect on future reproduction. And so that's an opportunity for you to add a few pounds to your heifers prior to determining replacements. If you are planning on keeping replacements and you are retaining ownership and want to implant your calves again at weaning, this is where the research is less clear. And so some research suggests when we are implanting heifers at weaning, we can delay that first cycle and kind of delay that first calving that you have for your heifers. And so as a producer, you have a couple of options there. You can consider not implanting any of your heifers at weaning if you pick your replacements later, or you sort your replacements off at weaning, or the group that you think you're going to keep, and implant the rest to capture that value when you sell them later on. So finally, just a quick play-by-play as to what I would do if I were implanting a herd or starting to implant today. I'd talk to my veterinarian and or nutritionist about what implants to use. Like I said, probably Ralgro is the most common that we see across the industry. There's no prescription required. And when you're picking up the implants from the vet, you can also pick up your disinfectant, your tray, the gun, everything should be there. I would only buy what I need for the year. There are expiry dates listed on your implants. And so if you do end up with a few extra, always follow the manufacturer's recommendations on the page or on the box. And then start with the branding and pasture turnout. So they're approximately 45 to 60 days old. Use it in your calves. And if you're keeping track of your weaning weights year over year, you should be able to see a difference. Reimplanting at weaning is up to you. If you're retaining ownership, I'd say that's a definite yes. If you're not retaining ownership or you're nervous about your heifers, that would be a place where you might want to skip it. And so you want to match your implant program to your intended marketing plan. And so I mentioned with the Synovex 1G, that was an implant that pays out a lot longer. So if you're keeping those calves for another couple hundred days or using them as grassers or something somewhere, that might be an opportunity to use a more expensive and longer implant. So Bottom line, if you're new to implants, I'd start with your steers at branding using a suckling calf implant. Always keep the ear clean and use a sharp needle. Place it between the middle third, between the skin and the cartilage. And if something goes wrong, redo it. If you retain ownership, always consider using an implant at weaning as well. And a measure of success is you'll feel that straight pellet line. There'll be no bunching of those pellets, minimal swelling, proper placement in an area with higher blood flow, and that performance should show up at weaning for you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren, for that presentation. I look forward to having you answer some of the questions that have been coming in. Just a reminder to the audience, if you do have any questions, please type them into the Q&A function or tab at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them after our second presenter has finished with her presentation. So I'm now excited to introduce our next speaker, Betty Green, and invite her to share her screen. So Betty, if you're able to share your screen, I'll introduce you. So Betty is a cattle rancher from the Interlake region of Manitoba. She and her grandson Curtis own G7 Ranch in Fisher Branch. Together they run a large cow herd that includes a small herd of Simmental purebred, a group of purebred Charolais, and a Simmental Charolais crossbred commercial herd. The ranch's goal is to background and sell high-performance crossbred tan calves raised in an environmentally and sustainable way. In order to achieve that goal, they believe that continuous improvement and research are both essential. With that, I will pass it over to you, Betty.
Thanks, Lauren. You can see my screen?
I can see it. Looks good.
Perfect. Thank you. So Lauren has introduced me. G7 Ranch is now in its third generation of ownership, operated in Fisher Branch, Manitoba, and we moved into the Interlake in 1982. Prior to that, we'd been mixed farming, and we wanted to focus on raising cattle. So we came with our family and have gradually evolved to now the farm being operated with myself and my grandson. Ooh. Just had an ad come up, so just give me a second here. While I'm trying to fix this problem, the other person involved is my daughter. She's a veterinarian, actually out of Prince George, BC, but she does own some of the Simmental cattle and is a real resource for us year-round. So as Lauren had said, we have full-blood Simmentals, a purebred Charolais group of animals, and then primarily we have the commercial herd. We have our own backgrounding feedlot, and so we background all of our calves and then developed the bulls for sale or for our own use, and the heifers for replacements into our herd. As most producers would tell you, they're always looking for ways to improve on their ranch in a variety of ways. One of them, of course, being improvement in animal productivity. And so we are always looking at genetics, improving reproduction and feeding management, but also the growth enhancing technology that is available. And we've been involved for quite some time. So about 30 years ago, we were asked to participate in a trial for implants. They came out, they weighed our calves. We implanted them at between 60 and 90 days. And 50% of the calves were randomly selected for implants and the others were not. The fall results at weaning showed a positive result for weight gain. And we were convinced. So we've never really looked back. Since that time, we have changed our protocols from time to time using a variety of implants, implanting all calves some years, then only steers at some time. And that was primarily because we were worried about the impact on reproduction. And we had buyers who wanted unimplanted heifers. So, you know, every ranch is going to have to assess their reality and what they want to try to achieve and make those decisions around those goals. So our implanting protocol begins with suckling calves at about 60 to 90 days of age. So of course we use an implant that is from that top list that Lauren was talking about, not aggressive, meant for suckling calves, and it will always say that. Then our calves are brought in and re-implanted just prior to weaning at the same time as we're doing our second vaccinations. Those implants are meant for wean calves 400 pounds and over. And then those animals are going into our feedlot. And again, we're taking a look at the implants based on the sex, the age, and the ration that we're going to be using in the feedlot. So I had a call from a buyer in Ontario, Ken Schaus, and Ken wanted to share some advice to producers. I thought it was really well founded. So as Lauren has suggested, not all implants are created equal. And we need to really talk to our vets, to our nutritionists, and Ken suggested even to the cattle buyers, because that's important information for them as well. So selecting the appropriate implant for age, sex, and ration is important. He suggested telling the buyers what implants you're using. And I think that's a good strategy. We actually have a written report for buyers when we're selling our calves, telling them what vaccines we use, what implants we use, what ration the calves have been on, and at what point they had been weaned so that they know how long they've been on a feedlot ration. Using the wrong implant, Ken has suggested, can negatively affect the cattle performance in a finishing lot. And he's seeing that from his end and has suggested that using the wrong implants can result in buyers not wanting to bid on those calves. So it really is important to use the right ones. Now, there's been a lot of research done, and I'm not going to share our farm results, but rather results that have been put together by the University of Manitoba, showing the impact of implanting on the various stages. And the first one that I'm showing on this slide is implanting pre-weaning growth of steers. So this is steers only. So these are suckling calves. And the slide shows the unimplanted and the implanted results in terms of weight and in terms of daily gains, the average daily gains. The research showed, and I should say that the dollar values that I'm using were based on November of 2024. So a year ago, last fall. And the reason why I'm using that, it was what was available. I didn't want to update it for this year. The prices were pretty good in the fall of 2024. And the results are probably a little more average than perhaps this year's. So the gain per steer, $153, and on 100 calves, $15,345. So that's fairly significant. The next slide shows implanting of both heifers and steers, and there is one column here that includes the results of some MGA trials that they had done. But we'll focus on the implants first for the heifers. So the control group having no implants, and the second column showing implanted heifers. These are post-weaning calves. So these are either on grass or going into a backgrounding lot, and showing about $5,700 on 100 head. The bottom two columns show the steer results, first with the control group and secondly the implanted steers, with an end weight of about 850 pounds. That's very similar to our production system. And the results that is shown here is just over $10,000 on 100 head. The last slide that I have shows implanting of post-weaning growth on animals that are going into finishing, or right through to the finishing. So the top two columns show implanted yearlings coming off grass, going into a finishing lot, and the results showing the implants having an effect of $17,272. The bottom two columns show calf fed in finishing lots. So these will be weaned calves going into lots. So they're there, of course, for longer, but the results show about just over $27,000 on 100 head. So certainly some significant impact for the use of implants. Now we're talking a lot about dollars, and I am perfectly upfront in saying that that was what motivated us to be involved right from the start. We believe that the extra dollars were a benefit to us, and so that's why we implemented it 30 years ago. But it's really not just all about dollars, and I'm pleased to say that the research has shown that that's true. So can use of implants improve environmental sustainability? And we're looking at things like greenhouse gas and ammonia emissions, land and water use. So again, I'm using research that's been put together by the University of Manitoba. And they started by looking at consumer perspectives. So factors that influence consumer demand on beef can be, of course, flavor and color, marbling and price. Consumers are taking into consideration product source, but environmental sustainability is on that list. And of course, management techniques and food safety are as well. But the environmental sustainability was the question that the researchers decided to take a look at. So this is a case study associated with the use of growth promotants in a Canadian feedlot. So this is in the feedlot, not at the cow-calf level, but I think it certainly translates into an impact at our level, at the cow-calf level as well. So the researchers' goal was to provide science-based information regarding growth promotants and the impact on environmental sustainability. And this is a critical first step in empowering producers to discuss the on-farm management practices that have led to improved sustainability, as well as assisting consumers in making informed decisions about the food they purchase and consume. So this is information that should be shared across the value chain, in my opinion. So the concerns, you know, we've all heard it, are the greenhouse gases that are related to the production of beef or agriculture, the amount of land that's used for producing beef, the amount of water, and the amount of ammonia emissions that are related to our industry. So the real world implications: growth enhancing technology improves feed efficiency and the average daily gain. So fewer days on feed and lower cost of production means a lot to producers. So getting the implants and using them have an impact on sustainable strategies to address food security challenges while decreasing greenhouse gas and ammonia emissions, as well as land and water use. So the research that they found, the results that they found were pretty clear. 3 to 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, 5 to 11% reduction in land use, 5 to 11% reduction in the use of water for producing beef, and 3 to 8% reduction in ammonia emissions. So in all 4 areas, there was an impact by using implants. I do want to recognize the researchers that were involved, the University of Manitoba and the National Center for Livestock and the Environment, as well as, of course, the funding sources that those researchers used to back their research, and BCRC, of course, was one of them. We certainly need to thank the researchers and the funders for the work that they do, because as producers, I can tell you that in our operation, it's had an impact. We use implants because there's a financial gain, but we're also very pleased to know that it's having a positive impact on the environmental sustainability of our operations. So that, I think, wraps my part of the presentation up, and we'll look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Betty, for your presentation. If you're able to stop screen sharing, Lauren, if you're able to turn your audio and video on as well, we'll get going on the questions. We've had quite a number come in, so we'll kind of just work our way down the list. So the first one, and Lauren, you had touched on this in your presentation, but if we are retaining heifers to keep as replacements, will implanting at birth or implanting after weaning impact the fertility of the replacement heifer?
Yeah, so if you're implanting at birth, no, there's no effect on fertility in the replacement heifer, assuming that you're using one of those suckling implants that I mentioned. If you're implanting after weaning with one of those grasser stalker implants, there is less research actually to that effect of how that affects reproduction, but it does suggest that it will delay that first cycle. And so we recommend not implanting at weaning in your replacement heifers, but for sure in your calves.
Thank you. Is there a better choice for implanting at 30 days of age for calves? So is there an option for that young of age?
Yeah, so that's essentially going to be your average age. You know, that's what the manufacturer's recommendations are, is 45 to 60 days. And it's kind of dependent on what the label of the implant says. But if you have calves, you're going to obviously have calves that are a little bit younger when you're branding, and you're not going to do them later. And so I would recommend still doing those calves. You're likely not going to see the same benefit as you would in some of those older calves, because they're still, you know, getting some immune status and growing in that phase. So I'd still do it. It's just you might not see as much.
Perfect. Thank you. A question for you, Betty. What is a rough cost per calf if implanting at branding time?
Actually, the implants that we use are virtually the same cost for the calves and for at branding time, and it's right around the $2 per implant.
How does that cost change? So if you're implanting, or does it remain the same if you're implanting at weaning or branding, and then you're re-implanting after or before you're doing in background if you're retaining your calves?
Yeah, it really depends on the implants you're going to use. The more aggressive implants cost more, but the ones that we use, obviously because they're suckling calves and then they're on a backgrounding ration that isn't a hot ration, the cost remains about the same.
Thank you. Lauren, I wonder if you could answer this one. How long do I need to keep my steers if I re-implant at weaning before it is appropriate to sell?
So not like I don't have I mean, we can run the numbers as to how much gain do you need, but in our office, our typical window is saying that an implant will pay for itself in approximately 30 days, probably sooner given the current price of calves now. But that's kind of, if you're going to keep them longer than 30 days, chances are that implant will pay off for you.
Did you have any additional thoughts on that, Betty?
Yeah, we certainly agree with that.
A question on a 4-H steers. Would you still implant a 4-H steer when achievement day is May 20th? So would you implant it now and then?
Yes, for sure. And that's probably a situation where I would use the more potent implants. Assuming your 4-H steer is probably on a more finishing ration. I didn't mention the implants that would be used in that situation, but your 100s, your choices, your Cinebex Plus, those types of implants, the Revlor XS would probably get you through right to May 20th. But yeah, it's kind of in this case, I mean, chances are if you're implanting today, there's a chance to re-implant again even before your achievement day on May 20th. But I would definitely talk to the vet about something stronger than what I mentioned. So the ones that have androgens in them is what you'd be looking for, to essentially, because it's a feedlot animal at this point.
So the next question is on whether implants are changing the behavior of cattle. So do testosterone implants in a steer change their behavior or attitude? If either one of you wanted to comment on that.
I don't think so.
We have really not found any change in the way animals behave. And certainly when we were randomly selecting 50% of our calves, that would have been the best time to see it, and we experienced no difference.
This is a question for you, Betty. Are implants used on marketed seed stock bulls, and do implants impact EPD values? And would the EPDs reflect higher performance than a buyer would see if they did not implant the progeny?
I'm not sure I can answer all of those questions, but certainly we don't implant any bulls. Why would you? You haven't removed the testicles, so they are producing their own growth promotants. So we would never implant a bull.
I wouldn't recommend implanting bulls either. I guess that is a situation too where implants probably wouldn't work as in your seed stock bulls.
Right.
Thank you for that. Next question. When using an implant such as Ralgrow on suckling calves going out to pasture in a bad or dry year, is creep feeding whole oats helpful or recommended to be able to see the impact from those implants? And if so, is there a higher risk of overeating or bloat in implanted calves? So I guess two questions kind of there, if either one of you wanted to answer that or comment.
So implanting versus not implanting it, like I had mentioned that your plane of nutrition is important, but if you have a poorer year and don't implant, then you're losing out that much more, in my opinion. So even if you implanted a group of calves and didn't implant another one, and they were out on poor pasture, you're still going to see a response in those implanted calves. And so I would definitely recommend, even in poorer years, to still be using that implant, so you can kind of get an extra boost without having to use more grass. When it comes to the higher risk of overeating and bloating, I would definitely talk to your nutritionist and come up with a plan as to what that might look like, to avoid any acidosis issues. And kind of, it's dependent on what your operation is and what you have available logistically.
And from my perspective, we use implants on our calves on dry years, which we've experienced 2 in the last 5. We still implant. We really believe we're sometimes seeing more benefit those years because the cattle are able to utilize more of the nutrients that are available to them. We do sometimes put out creep feeders, particularly for calves, off of our heifers. And we've experienced no difficulty with that. And our nutritionist said we should see no negative impacts.
Thank you for those answers. Those are great. We have a couple questions on the age at implanting and whether is there a too young of an age to get calves implanted?
Yeah, I wouldn't implant them like when they're born, right? Like when you're going out there putting a tag or something on them, or just kind of doing your newborn processing. Those calves are still getting their feet under them literally, and for those first couple of weeks especially, like they're getting used to just being alive, and that implant is probably not going to be doing much. And so the older they are, that 45-day range, they're starting to nibble on some grass and stuff, you're going to see more value there. But obviously when you're branding, some calves are going to be younger, some are going to be older, and so it's kind of going to be the average of your herd.
Thank you. This question is for you, Betty. You had talked about the consumer concerns with the use of growth enhancing technologies as well, and then the environmental benefits from using them. So does the use of growth enhancing technologies offset the concerns and challenges with consumer demand?
That's a good question, and it depends on the consumers and their perspective. Certainly, there are consumers who will say that they seek out animals that have not had implants, so more of the natural beef. But anecdotally, in talking to consumers, and I've done a fair bit of it when I was with the Manitoba beef producers, when you explain to them that the implants are improving the environmental sustainability, that they're just being able to utilize the nutrients better, and that they actually end up having a positive impact on the environment, that can impact most people who are just wondering how it works.
We've got a question on discounts on implanted suckling calves from one of our attendees, and they say that feedlot buyers in Ontario have told me that there may be discounts on implanted suckling calves when sold after weaning. And if there's any comments that either of you may have on that.
I have not had any comments or any information about that.
Okay, thank you. What are the side effects or potential side effects of implants or potentially improper implantation as well? So maybe cover both of those.
On my end, potential adverse effects are usually in the feedlot side when we start getting into more aggressive implants affecting meat quality, more so just more lean tissue than fat tissue. But at the cow-calf side, essentially any negatives would be just improperly placed implants or just not that implant not paying out as well. I don't know of any side effects of unless you're selling into a natural program, obviously you can't use them.
Yeah, and I think Lauren covered the potential for infected ears. Occasionally that happens, and it does here too. We had one this year, but out of almost 600 calves, I think that's acceptable. We catch it as soon as we can. We address it, and that's fairly straightforward.
The next question is for January calving producers that don't want to implant until grass turnout around 150 days of age. Is that okay to do that late, or are they still going to see benefits?
Yes, yeah. Implants always pay out, in my opinion. So, yeah, I think your calves are still going to see a benefit because they're still going to change how they put on lean tissue, right? And so, even at 150 days, it's better than you've just given up that first 100 days, right? And realistically, when I look at the entire production of the animal, every pound as you get bigger is going to be more valuable. So.
Any comments on that based on your experiences, Betty?
Yeah, I think the only thing is to really encourage producers to talk to their vets or their nutritionists about selecting the right implant at that age, because it won't be the same one necessarily that they would have used when the calf was 45 to 60 days old.
The next question is, how do implants affect marketing or selling of calves? And I think both of you have kind of touched on that a little bit, but just wondering if you could maybe provide a few more comments, but maybe from your perspective, Betty, and whether you've seen an impact on the markets that you're selling into, or just marketing your calves in general when using implants.
Yeah, we really haven't. We have always been very upfront with buyers. When we put our cattle on offer, we make sure that they know what we're using, but we haven't experienced any negative impact from that at all. Mm-hmm. Other than we don't try to get into the natural beef market.
Mm-hmm. And just a follow-up question on that, Betty, do you typically sell to the same buyers every year, or you have multiple new buyers for your calves as well?
We usually have the same group of buyers bidding on our cattle. Not always the same one comes out on top, but yeah, we have a variety of buyers, and in large part they're Ontario buyers.
Okay. Oh, that sounds good. Thank you. The next question. So when an implant runs out, does the animal have a period of no gain, or do they go backwards in growth at all?
No, your calf is still going to keep growing. It's just that advantage you got from the implant of, that extra 5 to 15% in average daily gain. They're just going to kind of slow down. They will not go backwards as long as their nutrition is the same, right? So they're just going to essentially slow down. And so at that period when that implant is slowing down and you have a marketing end date in mind, that's why we would re-implant in the feedlot. Is to just kind of get that hormone back up, to kind of keep that growth curve going through the end of the feeding period.
Do either of you recommend implanting purebred heifers at branding time?
I'll go first. I would say no, primarily because we're looking to select our replacement heifers at that time. And if we haven't made that decision, we wouldn't implant any of our heifers at that point.
I think it's a personal decision, but usually the purebred industry is a little bit different, like a little stickier on that kind of stuff. So if that's something you don't want when you're selling to your purebred clients, then that's kind of your decision.
And we've kind of touched on this one already, but are there issues to implant, at 150 days versus 30? I think you've answered that already, and that you will see those gains. Are there any other comments or final thoughts from either of you before we do close out the Q&A session?
No, I think use implants as you can, and the extra labor will definitely pay for it, and always talk to your vet or nutritionist about how it might fit into your operation, but it typically pays out quite well.
I would agree, and also suggest that one of the concerns we had right off the start was who was going to do the implant and how long was it going to take till we got really good at it. It doesn't take very long at all. I've done the implants. That's just most often been my job. And, you get so comfortable with placement and technique that it really doesn't take a lot of extra work. The last couple of years, my daughter has one of my other daughters wanted to take over doing some of the implants, and she caught on extremely quickly as well.
One just final question on that actually is, where would a producer, or can a producer get training somewhere? Would that be from their veterinarian or from a company selling implants? But for a producer that is new to implanting, is there training available on the implanting procedure?
I would say talk to, your vet or any of the reps that are selling implants. That's something we provide for our clients. And so I would assume that most other vet clinics would do the same.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We will close
from a producer's perspective, Kristen. I would suggest that if you know somebody that's implanting, ask if you can come and watch and maybe even try one or two. We've got a young fellow here. He wants to start implanting, and that's a great way to give them a chance to just get the feel for it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point there. Thank you. So we will close out the Q&A session now. And thank you, Betty, Lauren, for your presentations and spending time with us in the Q&A session. We did have a question on here on whether PDF slides will be provided. We do not provide PDF slides, but the recording will be uploaded to our website and sent out to all registrants so that you can rewatch it. If your question wasn't answered, I would encourage you to reach out to your veterinarian, nutritionist, local extension agent, provincial producer organization, or reach out to us on social media. Thank you again to our incredible speakers, and thank you all for spending your evening with us. We hope that you gained some valuable information and that you can bring back to your operation. This webinar was the first of our 2026 series. There will be a post-webinar survey link that will pop up once the webinar is finished, and we appreciate any and all feedback as well, or on the webinar, as well as for potential future topics as we plan for the 2027 webinar series. Again, thank you all for joining us.